Hey yo! Welcome to my unboxing and review of the SKR Pico by BIGTREETECH. So I guess first of all, this is a brand new driver controller board for 3D printers, intended for the Voron V0 by BIGTREETECH. And I think they did a really great job with this board. So I'll just be doing a quick unboxing as well as a quick overview of its features, as well as some of the cool new improvements that BIGTREETECH has made. So first of all, as you can see, this comes in a very small box compared to some of the other BIGTREETECH boards. So that's obviously, indicative that, this board is pretty small and compact, and BIGTREETECH has done a really great job in making a very small form factor board for the Voron V0, which, as you know, is a very tiny printer and doesn't have too much space for wiring and for just general space as a whole. So when you open the box, you'll get your board. I've already opened it to kind of check everything beforehand, but this should be sealed in an ESD bag. And then you'll also get USB-C to interface with the printer or to connect it to your Raspberry Pi. The classic iconic ducky, as well as this cable, which will also be used for to connect a Raspberry Pi, and if you need it to be powered through just UART. So, as you can see, when you first open up this board, you can see that it's very small. Here are the jumpers included if you need to change any configurations. And you can see this is a very, very, very nice looking board. BIGTREETECH has put in a lot of work, and little details such as multicolor silk screen on the board, as well as just the general compactness of the board. And one thing you'll see in the newer boards is the integrated heatsink. So similar to modern PC motherboards, BIGTREETECH has opted in for actual custom heatsinks, which is a big improvement over the previous style. So right here I have the SKR Mini V2, which was the recommended board for the V0 back a while back, and you can see the size improvement, and you can see over here, way smaller, way more compact, and just generally more aesthetically pleasing as well. You can see over here, you have to use the individual heatsinks, but now it's just one heatsink board. BIGTREETECH does still recommend that at a certain amperage, which can be found in the documentation, that you still will need active cooling, so with a fan, because convective cooling is almost always better than passive cooling, so you still might need it in case, but you can kind of see the difference. So you may be wondering, why is it called the Pico? And that's because of this microcontroller, actually. So for all those hardware enthusiasts, Raspberry Pi came out with their own version of a microcontroller, their attempt at a microcontroller called the RP2040 Pico, which is an ARM Cortex-M0 processor, which is also similar to the STM32 in the sense that they're both ARM processors, but as you can tell, this one's way smaller. I believe these are STM F4s. Yeah, sorry, actually, STM32 F1s compared to the RP2040. So from there, because of this, you're using a whole different new processor, and this has its advantages. It's smaller, and from personal hobbyist hardware, it's definitely more accessible and cheaper. So I think the cost savings are reflected to the consumer by using this awesome processor. It's very fast. It has a lot of different capabilities similar to the STM32, and I think it's a great idea that BIGTREETECH embraced using the RP2040 Pico, because honestly, using it on my own boards, it is a very good controller, very cheap, and very easy to use. So you'll kind of see the peripheral, so we'll kind of go through each of them. But another thing that BIGTREETECH does mention is that they use high quality Murata capacitors, so that's always good when it comes to boards like these. Yeah, you might also see that the 4 holes also coincide with mounting holes of a Raspberry Pi. So you can either mount it on top or on bottom, depending on the mount. So they have another version that's it's called Pico Armored, which has threading on it so that you can actually screw it in. So they do provide screws in here to attach it. But for this, you might need to get some standoffs or 3D print a mount in order to stack these. But the holes line up perfectly with Raspberry Pi 3, 4. But the other neat thing too is it also has mounting capabilities for the Pi 0 in case you want to use that for Clipper. It should be mentioned that this board is intended more for enthusiasts that will intend to use Clipper. So as you can see here, they also provide the mounting holes in order to mount a Pi 0 on it as well. And that can be found again in the documentation, but the holes do line up, so you can get it connected. So yeah, These run off TMC2209, so you might not see it because the heatsink's on. You can take it off, but trust me, they're just under here. And they're just TMC2209s, which means that, you know, pretty much standard for today's 3D printer boards with the TMC2209s. You don't have to insert anything in or buy separate drivers, so very cheap compared to, you know, buying the board or buying a board that doesn't have the drivers already in it, where you have to slot it in. So yeah, without further ado, we can kind of get into the pinout of what this board offers. So I'll just use my tweezers here. So the first thing you'll find is that it uses USB-C, which is awesome. If my camera will focus. USB-C, which is awesome. It has support for a laser. And then you also have for your heater cartridges for your bed as well as your extruder. Again, please refer to documentation for exact ones, as well as input power as well to the whole board. What you'll find over here is you'll have all your different, so you'll have your 3 end stops. So you'll have your Z, Y, and X end stop, as well as your both your thermistors for the bed and the heater, for the extruder and the heater. You'll also have a few other options. So over here is an extruder end stop. So if you're using a special type of extruder, or you can just map it to, you know, a filament runout sensor, etc., and set it in the firmware. You'll also have support for an RGB light. So for adjustable RGB LEDs, again, documentation is mentioned on how to hook this up. Over here, you'll have your 3 fans that can be controlled. So you have actual fan control with these 3 headers. So yeah, you can see over here the 3-pin. Again, sorry, my camera takes a while to focus, but you can see these can be controlled, I believe, through PWM, but again, I would check through the documentation. Right here, you'll find that this is another connection, Raspberry Pi through UART. Instead of, I guess it's the same thing as USB-C, but in this case, if you use this one over here, you won't need to power your Raspberry Pi because it'll hook it up. So we'll grab over this thing over here, and you'll see that this goes over to the Raspberry Pi GPIO. Again, check the documentation on how to hook that up, and then this plugs into the Pico. Up here, it's a bit harder to see because of the heatsink, but you'll see your 4 different, your 5 motor connectors. So you have your extruder, your X, your Y, and then your Z1 and your Z2. And as mentioned in other videos as well, these 2 are connected together through the same driver, while these 3 have their own. So in total, there's 4 drivers in this board. And then, yeah, you'll have your standard setup for most 3D printers. And yeah, that kind of takes us back to the center now. So right here, these are just a bunch of, for probes, BL touches, servos. So that's just kind of your auxiliary stuff that people add on to their 3D printers. So again, I would check with the documentation on how to hook the various setups. They have a documentation that shows for each thing, such as if you're putting an inductive probe or a BL touch, etc. And then yeah, you also have your fuse. So you can see they have improved the fuse. So the old fuse used this kind of car style fuse, which was a bit bulky. But because this board is way more compact, this fuse, sorry, my autofocus, can be popped out really easily, and it's compact. And you also see some other stuff. If you ever need to upload code, so because this is using the RP2040, uploading firmware is a slightly bit different. You use something called a .uf2 file, and you just put it into, you know, kind of boot select, and you know, you boot it from there, and it'll upload the firmware. So those instructions are also there too. So you'll have your reset button. So it is a bit different in how you would update the firmware on something like an STM32 processor. Instead, you would, you know, just get the compiled binary and, you know, upload it onto there. And yeah, I think that covers most of what's on the board. One thing that should be noted is, again, this board is, I would recommend for Clipper enthusiasts that know kind of, you know, how to generally set up Clipper, because again, there's support to mount the Raspberry Pi as well as, both Raspberry Pis. But as a side note, it doesn't appear to be any dedicated LCD connectors. So for example, like this, for an LCD for, say, the Voron or an Ender 3. So it should be noted that either A, you'll have to use Clipper Screen. If you don't know what Clipper Screen is, it's through the Raspberry Pi. And you can either use an HDMI touchscreen, or you can use the ribbon cable touchscreen. But if you're planning to use the old LCD touchscreens, there might be a way to work around it, but it doesn't say in the documentation per se. So if you are planning to use the old LCD screen for Voron V0, I would recommend trying to figure out what to do in that case, or just switch to Clipper Screen. I love Clipper Screen, it's great. You know, touchscreen interface is super nice. So yeah, all in all, I'm very impressed with BIGTREETECH and, you know, their improvements. I really do appreciate all that they've done to make, you know, make that change in that 3D printer driver board community. and kind of innovate and make things generally look nice, and kind of follow the theme of PC motherboards as well, making them look cool. And especially the 90-degree connectors, especially with the Voron V0 where you have to mount everything on a panel, a thin space through a panel. These 90-degree things are really helpful for routing, as well as just overall in general, having 90-degree mounts is just generally way nicer to manage, and you're able to kind of display the board instead of having mounds of cables come out from the side. So yeah, that's just kind of the overall, I think we've gone over every feature of this board, and yeah, very great board, would recommend, and it is definitely, it is cheaper than SKR 3.0, I believe. I'm not too sure, it might depend on your region how much cheaper it is, but this is the old 2.0, but if you're getting the 3.0, this is cheaper, more compact, and again, it is using this new Raspberry Pi microcontroller. So yeah, without further ado, that's my review of the BIGTREETECH Pico, and yeah, I do recommend it, and very great control board.